Well, good morning, everybody. Here's what I've got loaded up in the forecast video today on August the 5th. We're going to walk through the hurricane, Hurricane Debby, and just watch how the upper level winds are going to allow Debby to stall out over the southeast, producing a pretty significant flood threat. We will then walk through some of the weekend rainfall events, take a look at some of the hail data from this past weekend, and then also get an idea on where the severe weather is going to be in the near term. I'll then start to push this out. We'll do 5 models again. We'll look at the 7 and 10 day output from both of those, or from all of those. And then we'll look at this temperature pattern, which we know is going to have a major cool down starting already in the northern tier of the U.S. and driving into the central United States. Then at the end, I've been thinking a lot about some forecast content that was shared with me over the weekend from some other forecasters. And I sometimes will look at some of it, but I tend to stay away from it. I don't want it to bias my opinion on things. But the headlines were pretty catching. And it was all about excessive heat lasting through all the way through fall in the middle part of the country. And want to ask a question if that makes any sense. So we'll look at some analogues, we'll look at some of the predictions there, and then we will wait for tomorrow to get tonight actually, to get the new long-range European out to see if there's any kind of correlation there. I'll finish up with some international weather and a longer-term look on the hurricane season. Okay, all that's ahead of us. We've been watching an animation here just through this morning as the sun was rising across the country, and of course your eyes probably drawn to the tropical system named Debby. Debby did very quickly intensify, if we watch this animation here, very quickly intensify right along the Florida coast, and as it did so, jumped up there to Cat 1 in strength and made landfall just about the time I started recording this. You can see the eye going right here over this section of Florida. So very intense rainfall, major flooding threat, I think is going to be the primary thing we're dealing with. I have family that lives right in this area, and so I sent a message this morning to see how things were going. I'm still waiting to hear back from the flooding in their area. But through 6 a.m. Central Time this morning, looking at the national view of total accumulated precip for the weekend, we can see a lot of area in the midsection of the country was very dry. The southwest monsoon, a lot of storms running around. And then earlier in the weekend, there were storms that kind of went up the coast like this and wrapped their way around, which was just fascinating to watch. And here's the beginning of this front that's driving into the midsection of the country. Now, over the weekend, a lot of severe weather in the northeast, strong winds, big hailstorm that went right through parts of Minnesota. I'll look at that more closely in just a few seconds here, but I wanted to zoom in and kind of give you an idea about the rainfall we've seen through 7 a.m. this morning, East Coast time, already from Hurricane Debby. And some of these rainfall totals here already got one spot here right along the coast, radar estimated at over 13 inches, almost 14 inches. Several places greater than 5 to 7 inches in this area, and that's just through early this morning. One of the things that'll be interesting about Debby is that the steering currents, this is 700 millibar winds, the steering currents that could pull Debby around are not in the position we thought they would have been when we looked at the forecast data a week ago. So for example, some of the Bermuda High is here. The upper level flow in the jet stream is pretty far to the north. There's some strong winds in the Caribbean, which means right now, the only thing that's going to push Debby around is this piece of flow in the mid levels of the atmosphere here, coming, around this broader area of high pressure and then curling into Debby. But that's not a lot of push, and it's going to allow Debby to, I think, kind of sit and spin over the southeast for several days. This morning's 5 a.m. update from the National Hurricane Center. Let's see if they got a new one in here. Okay, they got an 8 a.m. update. Still a hurricane at a Category 1. It is expected to weaken with time. That's, just getting the circulation over the southeast. Now with the friction and the lack of hot water to continue to sustain it, it does look like it's going to stay at tropical storm strength as it rolls across parts of southern Georgia. Wind speeds right now are at 75 miles an hour, the maximum sustained. But just notice, by Friday, we're still looking at a tropical depression sitting over North Carolina. And as a result, this is going to be there for a while, and the risk for heavy rainfall is going to be relatively high. The ensembles from the European model, the GFS, the UK Met, and the CMC continue to show that same idea. I've played out 5 days here in the forecast track, and it's not moving too much, which means our flood threat across the East Coast is going to be relatively high as this rolls through, especially into the southeast, from Virginia up through the Carolinas back to Georgia and Florida. So not a fast mover, and the steering current's just lacking to really kind of get this thing out. On the storm surge side of it, this morning we had 6 to 10 feet, right in through this area here. lesser farther to the south, but as you come over and the hurricane eventually kind of works its way back into some of the warmer water here in this part of the Atlantic, we could again see a brief re-strengthening, and right now they're looking at 2 to 4 feet of storm surge. As I mentioned, 2 weeks ago, I was down in Savannah, and the water temperature down here is very warm. So I just want to make a point that this will have plenty to work with as it moves into this region to extract more heat from the ocean and possibly just keep and maintain its strength. Now we're going to go and look at a suite of models to kind of see what's going on here. And I like the high-res NAM for a lot of reasons. It's not typically one that we generally use for hurricanes. We talked about that. But once the hurricane is well within the domain, it can do a decent job with figuring out where it's probably going to go. So through tonight, getting into tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, and evening, working our way out to early Wednesday morning now. We're going to stop this at the end of the run, which would be 2 o'clock Eastern time on Wednesday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Just notice that it barely moved over those 60 hours, and as a result, this is going to be a major flooding threat. So I want to show you some new maps. I work on these all weekend long, every weekend, every chance I get until my kids' activities get really busy again. I travel a lot for work during the week, so I don't have a lot of time to do this, but we're about ready to relaunch agweather.com with all new maps, and I hope you like the new ones. I'm going to ask your opinion of some of these in a few moments. But this is from the high-res NAM looking at a cumulative maximum wind gust. So in other words, over the whole 60 hour in the forecast, just make a map of whatever the fastest winds that are being predicted by the model. And if we kind of zoom in here, again, we knew this was, of course, before landfall early this morning. But as I mentioned, out over open ocean here, we could get these winds back up over, 70 miles an hour. That's certainly possible. But in the interior, the high-res NAM is picking up on a pretty large area that could be seeing wind gusts in the 50 to 60 mile an hour range. We need to be very aware of that wind threat in the near term. But I hope you like the new projection, the new map structure. Let's take a look at some other maps here. This is the same, of course, view, but from the high-res NAM looking at precip. Now, the NAM can be very, very wet at times. It's convection allowing, and it's putting down a lot of precipitation in this area. Big swath here of 6+ inches, locally much, much higher amounts. I'd like to compare that to the high-res European. So now you see I got them all lined up on the same projection, but here's the opinion I'd like to gain from all of you. On this map, I made the numbers a bit smaller. Okay, I hope you can, I know a lot of you watch this on your phone, so it's really not going to be easy to see, but on my computer, those are the numbers they're pretty small and they're all black, okay? To show you the GFS, I made anything that was, above, I guess, an inch. I'll have to go back and look at my code, but I think anything above an inch, I made yellow. I don't know if you can see it very well. I may need to turn anything that gets up into these colors back over to black. I'll work on this. But I hope you like the new projections. They all fit in the same, the same domain, so you can compare models very easily here. So I'm continuing to work on this, and my goal is I'm not going to keep this old format around through August, so I want to get it done by the end of August. But back to the meteorology. Models are putting down easily 6 to 10 inches of rain, some places higher than that, over a foot, and the risk here is relatively high of locally having some places that approach 18 to 24 inches of rain. I think there's going to be a few spots that have the ability to do that where those bands just sit over. So the flood threat into this area is very high. Again, there's the European model. I guess we can see those black numbers better in this part of my color bar range, but over a foot of rain easily expected out of this. The problem has been that over the last 30 days, this area has had a lot of rainfall. Remember, we had a deep discussion about how the Bermuda High was just a pump of moisture into this region at the end of July. And so we're going to be hitting some already saturated regions in through here with that places that already have 150 to 200% of normal precipitation. And this was the reason why the drought monitor made such huge gains in this area. After expanding in June and part of July, the rains that came mid to late July had already given us a 2 to 3 class improvement in the drought monitor. So this rain is coming on top of it, meaning we've gone from drought development in early summer to now pretty significant flood threat going forward. And early this morning, about the time I'm recording, 6:30 here, the flood watches were beginning to extend farther to the north. I imagine they're going to continue, but there's a widespread area here where we have tornado watches in addition to the hurricane watch and the hurricane warning that's still along the coast. Tropical storm warnings extend pretty far inland, and you're kind of getting your normal bag of watches, warnings, and advisories with this tropical system. I think the biggest threat is going to be flooding going forward. Now, outside of that, we continue to see red flag warnings, excessive heat watches, and warnings in the west. There's also air quality alerts. We're going to take a look at the air quality issues at the end of this. Flood watch has been posted here just south of Minneapolis, straight across parts of Wisconsin. We'll take a look at the heavy rains that could come along this area very soon today as well. But if we just go back to kind of a national view on the radar, our story here is primarily there's a front driving itself into the north interior of the United States. And this is where through early this morning, we're seeing some locally heavy rain and some thunderstorm activity. This going back to last night into today, we can see the circulation around the Four Corners High, the southwest monsoonal circulation, some isolated showers and storms even through early this morning in parts of Washington and Oregon. But a lot of the East Coast will just keep an eye on Debby as it moves farther to the north. But there was some lightning in this stuff this morning. So there's your storms in Oregon, Washington. You can see the storms coming out here, parts of the Dakotas into Minnesota. One that just went through parts of Chicago, I imagine causing some major delays this morning in travel in Chicago. And then what's very interesting is that on Debby's south side and eastern side, a lot of lightning. Now you cannot get lightning in a cloud without ice, multiple species of ice. So like small hail, graupel, ice crystals that take on many different shapes and forms, from needles to dendrites to plates, all of that mixing itself up in the upper levels of the storm and therefore separating charges, which all happens because of gravity and the size of those particles. Well, anyways, we typically don't see that in hurricanes, mainly because the temperature profile in a tropical system is so warm, so high, that the ice occupies just the middle and upper parts of the cloud and doesn't extend down far enough to give us the big separation, nor do we typically have a lot of graupel, which is a needed piece to, I think, get a lot of lightning. So this is a bit rare to see this much lightning from this tropical system. But if we look out there at this past weekend, I mentioned I wanted to show you where that hail was. Large storms in the western and high plains, producing some large hail. Big one here in Minnesota. Look at that streak of hail that came through here. And the day that happened, let's go back to it here. This was on, there we go, the 3rd. So 350 reports. So even ahead of Debby, we had severe winds and heavy rains in this area. There was the storms in northern and central Minnesota and the storms down here in the Panhandles. Just wanted to make sure we hit on those to see where ahead of this week we had some pretty tough weather over the weekend. So today, let's see if we got an update on this. There we go. Today's SPC forecast. They have the storms in Idaho, Montana, and right here along the sagging frontal boundary, which will continue to push farther and farther toward the south. And then, of course, associated with Hurricane Debby, large area of Florida, but then Georgia and parts of South Carolina as well. Tomorrow, we'll keep an eye on that frontal boundary, which will run right through this area. Right now, they've got Montana hit up with the greatest risk of the strong storms. So we'll take a closer look at those in a second. And this is out there on the 7th. Okay, so let's go back to the high-res NAM, but get kind of a larger scale view. This is this morning through this afternoon and evening. Let's play this out till tonight. So we're going to watch this corridor tonight. Storms rolling around the backside of this ridge in the Four Corners states, and then take a look at Idaho coming into Montana. That's where we're going to have to watch for some of these pretty nasty storms today and tomorrow. And then you can see the heavy rains moving out of Wisconsin into Michigan as Debby goes through parts of Georgia towards South Carolina. This is midday tomorrow on Tuesday, playing into tomorrow evening. So the frontal boundary sags through here, so possibly some heavy rains in the eastern Great Lakes to the northeast. Debby's still spinning, not moving very much, but take a look at the storm activity here. All throughout the mountains, getting into the high plains and western plains, the risk tomorrow is relatively high. A slight risk in this area for severe storms. We'll keep an eye out on that tomorrow afternoon and evening. And we'll play this all the way out to the end of the animation. You see that the Red River Valley of the North is expected to get another round of rain here. But bigger picture, what has changed? I'm going to show you the artificial intelligence first, and then we're going to go into the ensemble real quick. So overall, we still have the pieces in place as expected. What is that? That's this kind of folding over of this ridge, almost like a wave break here, and this deeper trough that's going to drive cooler weather in. The artificial intelligence tries to bring what's left of Debby after doing this here, right toward the Appalachian Mountains. And, as we saw earlier, that may not be, it's going to go over central North Carolina, but does it get really absorbed into this trough is yet to be known, I think. And that's all the way out there by Saturday. So playing this forward, this is what I'm curious about. The southern edge of this trough in all of last week's forecast until Friday was really very generously putting down precip. And we were just getting the front here, and there was plenty of moisture coming around the southern side. The models seem to really back off on that. And even though the trough is there to cool things down in this area, we're not expecting to get the moisture quite like it was forecast a week ago. As we get out there a week from now, this is next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Interesting just to show that the 10-day outlook from the European artificial intelligence continues to drop lower heights into this area. And what that means is there's no big ridge developing there. And is that shared by the ensemble? It is, but, whoops, that's the newest one. It is, but let's get back there. There we go. That's day 10, 11. You'll notice how quickly the ensemble wants to rebuild a ridge here. So if we get out day 13, 14, 15, and beyond, the European ensemble wants this pattern again. Large ridge in the North Pacific. We're going to talk more about that at the end. Trough in the west. There's our ridge. Trough leaving the east. Now, how this ridge moves and opens and closes in this area, I think, is what's going to be tricky to understand. But just note that I think the ensembles are really washing out a dominant signal at the end of week 2. But that's very common. That's not telling anybody anything they don't know. That's what the ensembles tend to do. But if we go back to the AIFS, try that again. There we are. Just take note of, the models just drop in these troughs into the west, meaning there'll be waves of heat that will come back into the central United States with this. So a lot going on here, and I don't think the models have a good handle on anything beyond about 7 or 8 days at this point. So we're going to look at 7 days out, and then we're going to add the days that follow and give you a 10-day forecast as well. New artificial intelligence here. This is the 7-day outlook from the AI. That's the 10. So what's interesting is just this. Look at all this wet weather trying to come into Kansas, right on the Kansas, Oklahoma border. This area desperately needs to get this rainfall, and we just have to see figure out, one, why the AIFS has that. I'm guessing it's because you come out here, look at the trough it's trying to drop by midweek next week. And that's the wild card. So there you go. This is the national blend of models, 7 days. Here's 10-day. Notice it's not there. That heavier rain that was in the AI is not here in the national blend of models. In fact, it's got a pretty large corridor that opens up that's relatively dry through the next 10 days. All this very narrow, heavy rain band, a lot promoted by the by the front that's dragging through this area today, but plenty of rain in Colorado and the Western Plains, according to the models. Now, the WPC, as you know, only goes out 7 days. So this is just a 7-day outlook. Very dry in through this area. Dry in the west, very wet in those same corridors. But here's the European model, 7-day and 10-day. And so the European is also trying to drop something in here, but different look than what the AI is. There's a lot of the Mid-South, the Delta, coming out of the Southern Plains. It's going to be drier in this pattern, according to the models. And we'll look at one last one, which is the GFS. That is the 7-day, and here's the 10. And the models do not agree. Just take a look at the differences when you subtract from the ECMWF the GFS model data. And remember, when you look at this, these are the colors that represent where the GFS is wetter. These are the colors that represent where the European is wetter. So the European is much wetter here and in this corridor and also here. The GFS wetter in these areas. Look at that difference in the southeast all the way up through this part of the east coast and northeast, So these models are not in agreement about where this pattern goes even out 7 days at this point. I will show you them just side by side. I can't wait to get my new maps in here. They're so much better, I think, and consistent from the old ones. But we're playing through Tuesday into Wednesday. We've seen this. There we go. This is Thursday. There's a weak low that rolls right along the U.S.-Canada border toward Ontario. Notice how much slower the European model is with it. But that drives in some more cooler air. And you can see in the European, it just keeps this corridor wetter here while Debby is still sitting and spinning here. Now take a look at where Debby is in the GFS. Look, watch this again over here in the GFS. So you're watching, there's Debby. Curls up, this is the 0-0 run, goes back across southern Georgia, hangs out in southern Alabama for a little bit, and then gets pulled out by a broader front right here by next Sunday. And now that's a bit different from the European. So let's watch the European. This is tonight. here in southern Georgia. It goes out over the open ocean. This is very similar to what what NOAA is saying in the National Hurricane Center. Then goes toward North Carolina. That's very much what National Weather Service and National Hurricane Center are saying. And then the front drags it out very quickly. So much different model simulations, only out a week. So I'm going to have to just rely here a bit more on ensemble probabilities. And this is where we're seeing the European model toss down the wettest conditions. So this is everywhere that we expect more than an inch. Now I know we just got a new model run in, so I'm going to have to flip this back once I go there. And let's go back to the 0Z, take it out 10 days. There we are. That is the chance of staying under a ½ inch. Look at the Ohio River Valley, getting down into the Delta, all the way down into the southern plains. And who's on the really dry side of this? This is the probability of staying under a 1/10 of an inch. That's a big section of Illinois over to Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, clipping parts of the Mid-South, the northwestern part of the southeast U.S., and then right here back into Texas. And the wild card is going to be, I think, this area. That's the spot where we continue to see models trying to put in better support for rain later. This is next week, not this week. And we'll have to see if that does shake out. Because if you just look at this week, that is the probability of staying under a 1/10 of an inch through the next, through Saturday, just as an example. All right, beyond that, day 10. Flow's still pretty weak, but I'm generally seeing this behavior with some sort of trough off the west coast. There is slight ridging here that's over the south, but overall, that pattern is why most of the models are looking at something like this for the week 2. Now, we know that the week 2 forecasts from last week, which are this week's forecasts, made a major bust on how wet it was expected to be in this quarter. It's only going to be now wet across the northern part of it. But the new week 2 forecasts, there's the CPC update. Here's the European model. Just kind of zoom in on one. It all depends on how that trough lives here versus the rebuilding of a ridge into this section of the country, which is what some of the forecast models are doing. I don't trust any of it right now after getting burned last week on maybe putting a little bit too much reliance on the models, which had been performing well going into this time frame. On the temperature side of it, just wanted to show you, this is what the second half of July getting to the first 4 days of August look like in terms of temperature ranks. So where that heavy rain moved over Florida, knocked back these crazy hot temperatures we saw during that time frame, very hot in the southwest. And as we noticed, Montana having massive swings in temperatures. A week ago, 105 degrees here. Today's forecast high, 72. And you can just see here where that front's going to drag itself through the midsection of the country. Very hot in the western Corn Belt, through the the Ohio Valley into the northeast, but cloud covered, of course, knocking these temperatures back. Very warm west. This is Tuesday. Wednesday, look at the cooler air driven down into the southern tier of the U.S. That is Thursday. So we could have from, my goodness, 103 here in parts like Dallas to 79, near Omaha, even lower than the Sioux Falls, 76. That's quite a change in temperatures here, 30 degrees across that stretch of that cold front. There's Friday into Saturday, very cool week all week in this part of the northern plains back toward Montana. And then we get into Sunday. Day 5 through 10, let's have a look at it here. And then go out day 10 through 15. And this is where we start to see some things that we just have to talk about in this longer term, because it's not only the GFS opening up a lot of the country and Canadian prairie back to warm, but the Europeans doing it as well. There's day 5 through 10. Here's day 10 through 15. And what it's suggesting here is some troughing off the west and some sort of ridging opening here. So if we get flow that comes in and out like this and runs over a ridge, it's going to be a lot of mid-August heat. So we need to ask, what does it take to get that? What does it take if some of these, there's just been some forecast discussion of a hot rest of August for a big section of the United States and Canadian prairie, cooler possibly along the west coast, maybe along the east coast as well. If that's the discussion, what does it kind of take to get there? Well, I want to make this point first. The next 15 days, there are a few things that have started to shift around. While there is still a larger ridge here, this has changed. Remember last week we were seeing these 15-day forecasts keeping, lower heights here that were driving into the Midwest, which we still see the remnants of. But there's been a bit of a pattern change across North America, and this trough has advanced farther to the east, closer to more of Europe. And so we got to look at this and try to figure out what this is going to do, because on Friday, the week 3, week 4, which would put us squarely into the second half of August, from the CPC, they kept all that heat in the Great Basin. They kept it along the Continental Divide and in the south, but also kept things quite wet here. And what's interesting about this pattern is, to me, it suggests there's some sort of ridging event here, which I don't know why the temperatures weren't hotter in that area. But it's fine. We're going to compare their forecast to others. The first one's going to be the CFSV2 weekly forecast. So this is fresher. This was just released. And I'm going to go out to there to that week 3, week 4. And while I don't have much faith in the precipitation forecast it's giving, so I'm not even going to show it to you. I want to go this. Temperatures. Notice that their end of August temperature anomalies are very warm. Starting off, first in the central U.S., the Corn Belt, the Mississippi Basin, and then showing up in the Canadian Prairie to finish the month. Now, thinking all of that through, I wanted to analyze the midsection of the country and use it to diagnose what's going to happen on the coasts. So this is what we're going to do. I went in and I chose the Corn Belt. So we're looking at all those Corn Belt states that stretch throughout the Mississippi Basin and the surrounding areas. It's a big area, but we'll just generally call it the central U.S. What I did was I went to August and September, and I looked all the way back to 1895 at the temperature pattern for August and September. All right. Now, if we scroll down to the bottom, you have the ability to kind of rank things. You can put it at the coolest, or you can go to the warmest. So going to the warmest, I then went in and selected years that were, in the last 4 to 5 decades. So I didn't go back to 1936 because I can't reconstruct ocean temperatures back then. So I primarily stayed within the last 40 to 50 years, and I've made a list. And then what I did with them is I started to create some maps for us. Here's the years that were chosen. Now remember, this was based on temperature. So if the midsection of the country is going to get hot and stay hot, this is what needs to happen. A large ridge needs to live north of Hawaii, south of the Aleutian Islands, like squarely in between the two. That seems to be the pattern set up. Helps if there's a trough that's in part of the Bering Sea, North Pacific here. You then will get, because of that, the triple ridge pattern, with one sitting there, another one here over the Great Lakes, and the Bermuda High being kind of pushed and shoved over toward Europe. Now what this does, it gives you a flow pattern that does this. And that tends to drive temperatures down in the west coast, and it tends to impact the Northeast with some cooler weather as well, but not always. But that heat sits right there. That's what happens. Okay, what do the ocean temperatures need to look like? Well, this is what's interesting. You construct all those years together. We had a La Niña that was very central Pacific based. A lot of very warm water that was in the North Atlantic here, and warm water that came off of Japan. See that? Do we have anything like that? Okay. Pieces. Is this a central based cool anomaly with La Niña? Not yet. Is there warm water in the North Atlantic? Yes, but it's here. Those other years it was a bit farther east. And is there warm water in this area? Yeah, but there's not cooler water there, which we kind of saw in that analog. See it? So pieces of this are there, but not everything, okay? What did the precipitation pattern do as a result? Now, this is really interesting. This is precipitation rate anomaly. We saw very wet conditions along and just off the East Coast. This is our hurricane season. It stormed in the midsection of the country despite the heat. So we weren't blocking all of that off. And, thinking about it, August, September, this also showed kind of a start to the monsoonal season, which was a bit early in South America. So we really want to know if this makes a lot of sense. So let's keep going. Pressure patterns. There they are. 1. Now this is interesting. 2 and 3. Bermuda High way over to the east. Pacific High directly between Hawaii and the Aleutian Islands and Alaska. But surface high pressure built here, which is always on the downstream side, the right-hand side of where the ridge is. And there was lower pressure at times despite the heat in this area, which is what helped, I think, promote those thunderstorms during some of those years. But look at how wildly different some of these years are. Like I've got 83 and 88 in this, and at the same time I've got 18 and 16 in this same mix. These were all warm, late season, August, September, Corn Belt temperatures, and this is what the pressure pattern looked like. All right, what did the hurricane season do? I only chose those years that were in my list, And I was curious, making a 1,000 nautical mile radius around Florida, where we had tropical systems. And I noticed this. There was a lot of activity in the Gulf of Mexico and a lot going on here, which I think is just reflective of the Bermuda High being farther to the east. Now, my drawing makes you think that something didn't happen. I'm just saying there seems to be more activity there and there versus stuff coming right up where Debby is right now, just as an example. And I certainly think that this is a year where there could be a lot of tropical cyclone activity in the Gulf of Mexico, unlike previous years. So now that you've seen that analysis, can I show you this? This is the new European outlook. And what's really compelling about this is that through mid-September, notice where they've put the highest pressure anomalies between Hawaii and Alaska. The Bermuda High, which isn't quite behaving the same way, has its highest pressure anomalies north, but not necessarily anchored, as in those other years, over like Europe. And there certainly isn't in the forecast a big ridge over the southeast, which means we have flavors of a warm late summer. But it's not, I don't think, a slam dunk in the forecast just yet. Now, if I zoom in on the United States and just show you the temperature pattern, yeah, it's warm. I mean, the model does this all the time, though. But where is this heat going to anchor? Is it really going to be in the central United States? There are some indications that it could be. But is it like we saw in July? Because, by the way, for the month of July, the map looked the same as it does right here. This map always looks warm, in my opinion, for the midsection of the whole country in summer. These anomalies are always so warm. Then let's look at the precip. To be honest, you're like, oh man, look how dry. No, I don't think so. I think it's looking dry right now, but you're just a shade on this side of average. If we were getting these colors like they're getting down here along the coast of Mexico, then we're talking about major precipitation anomalies. And I'm just going to say this. I don't think anything about mid to late August and September is settled just yet. There's too many things that are out there moving around that can make us kind of nail this down. Do I think there is the possibility of a warm late summer and fall? Yes. Do I think it's going to be record scorching hot, as some of the headlines had mentioned? No, I don't think so. I think it's going to be hot, but not breaking records every day kind of hot, which is the way some of those titles were listed to me. So that's my analysis, and we'll just keep going with it and watch how it kind of eventually rolls in. I do want to bring you back to something we talked about earlier. That's a smoke forecast. Over the next 48 hours, we're seeing a lot of that wildfire smoke move across the Midwest here behind the front. Still more fires throughout the West continue to contribute more to this. And just looking at some of the satellite data, here's the sunrise early this morning. We can go back to yesterday, and we can see some deep convection. Remember, these were those stronger storms we saw, 25 minutes ago. But this is actually pyrocumulus on top of a wildfire here. All right, last couple of things. Since I mentioned air quality in the West, I do want to show you that over the next 10 days, we still have a lot of Saharan dust blowing across the open Atlantic Ocean. And we're just curious if that's going to combine with the fact that we're seeing some upper level suppression moving into this area to get into the middle part of August. Now, we can have upper level subsidence and still make hurricanes, especially if you're near the peak of the season. But this could be something that would say, just completely taking the lid off and cranking up hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. This is going to tell us that maybe more of August is a bit more subdued going into that time frame. We can see that over the next 10 days. Okay, this is Debby. We're going to watch for something down here deep in the Caribbean, but this will be the next thing we're going to watch right in through this area, which has got a low probability of development right now, but we do need to keep an eye on it. Lastly, some international things. Still, this is compelling to understand the temperature contrast along the Sahel, which is going to be driving these tropical systems. Much of southern Europe is still quite warm. Most of Australia very warm. But take a look at Argentina. A lot of cold air driven into this area right now. And we can see there are going to be some decent rains on that too. But watch Africa to be sending off these African easterly waves for the next, about 85 days. That's going to be key to keep an eye on. But there's your global precipitation forecast for the next 10 days from the European model. And with that, I'll finally wrap this one up. I really appreciate you sticking around with me today. We'll talk again tomorrow. Thanks.